Alright, I'm gonna start this off by saying that I was wrong. I'm not exactly Resident Evil 4's biggest fan. I like the game enough, but I've never felt as fondly about it as I know some people do. So when it was RE4's time to get remade, I wasn't really excited. Happy, sure, I like Resident Evil 2 Remake a lot, and 3 has some problems, but I still enjoy playing it. So it stands to reason that I'd like Capcom's reimagining of Resident Evil 4 too. But I was wrong to be so down on the game before even giving it a chance, and I can happily say that the Resident Evil 4 Remake is actually incredible. Capcom has taken everything that made the original game work so well and improved nearly everything it stumbled on. And while there are some cuts here and there, just like with the RE2 and 3 remakes, each one felt right to do here. Resident Evil 4 Remake feels a lot better paced than the original game because of this, with certain events and areas rearranged a bit to make them feel more engaging. Resident Evil 4 is still very much the action-focused game it's always been. The core loop revolves around Leon fighting off Los Illuminados with tight gunplay interspersed with flashy melee attacks and careful navigation of the environment. I say this with no hint of exaggeration at all. This game's combat is the peakest peak I have ever peaked, and we've all peaked plenty of times in our lives, but no one's ever peaked just like this. Every fight here is an exhilarating dance of crowd control while balancing resources, and since weapon switching now happens at the touch of the D-pad, you're more incentivized to constantly switch the guns you use. Some ammo also feels a bit less common now, so I found myself running out of shotgun shells during a fight pretty often, but this is really a good thing since it forced me to shake up my playstyle, as opposed to mostly relying on the handgun and shotgun as I did in the original game. The feeling of the movement is also way different here. We obviously don't have tank controls anymore, but Leon still has quite weighty movement, which isn't a bad thing, but is something that felt weird for the first hour or so. By the end, I actually quite liked how the movement felt. It's hard to explain, but I feel like it gives greater emphasis to each action you take. Being unable to move quickly also incentivizes you to use the new knife parry mechanic, and I think that this is perhaps the greatest defensive tool that Resident Evil has ever introduced. I was frankly a bit wary when I discovered the knives could break again. I hated that mechanic in Resident Evil 2 Remake since it just felt annoying to deal with. But here, since knives have a far more important use, having them with limited durability makes sense. The game also gives you plenty of knives to pick up as you go. You can also repair and maintain the first knife in the game whenever it gets damaged, so as long as you have the money, you will be able to get a knife pretty easily. This time Leon can also crouch and sneak around, and if you're able to get behind an enemy without being spotted, you can quickly take them out with the knife. This isn't how I approached most encounters, because it honestly felt a bit too slow, but it's awesome that you can approach some situations like this if you wanted to. It helps to take out a few enemies before the real fight starts, so it is useful. This time around, we also have crafting, and this isn't like the Far Cry style of crafting, where you spend 15 minutes hunting for the right kind of cow skin. The crafting here is essentially just the gunpowder mixing from RE2 and 3, with the added materials of small and large resources. I found myself constantly crafting new ammo for all my weapons, but was never put into a situation where I had too much ammo. Ammunition is a tricky thing to balance in survival horror, and the remake uses the same sort of adaptive loot that the original game did. So you're very unlikely to be without any ammo for your weapons for an extended period of time. And ammo isn't anywhere near as rare as it was in 2 and 3, so be sure to go nuts when you can. While we're on this topic, every weapon from the original game is here once again, but this time they all have bigger differences in how they handle. The Red 9, for instance, is still a slower, more powerful handgun, but it's far less accurate than something like the Punisher. Guns still have a lot of personality here, which the original game also nailed, so the fact that it's been preserved here is really cool. Inventory management is also still a major focus too. Just like in the original, you're likely to spend a while moving items around in the attaché case so that they all fit in nice and neat, but they never do. Luckily, the auto sort is a very good solution to when you wanna just sort things out quickly. I also need to point out the amazing job that the sound team did, because hoo boy, the sound effects are so good.
Present for you. You gotta be
Each gun has this punchy kick that makes them so satisfying to shoot. And on that note, I loved the soundtrack. It's still got some of those iconic themes in there, like the save theme, but it's all got more of a creepy edge. For the most part, the Resident Evil 4 remake is still step in step with the original game, but something that the 2005 release lacked for me was a proper sense of exploration. Exploring the environment and finding pathways that loop into each other is one of my favorite things about this franchise. And while Resident Evil 4 had plenty of secrets to discover, it never really scratched the same itch that older titles did. It's largely just a linear adventure that has you go from area to area, and outside of the castle section, there aren't many places where you could really just explore as I remember it. Or maybe a better way of saying it is that there wasn't much of a reason to do that. The RE4 remake fixes this problem in a few ways. For a start, each section of the game is freely explorable up to a certain point of no return, and each area now has a ton of treasure locked in cabinets or behind doors that you can't access when you first see them. But at a certain point, you'll eventually get the keys to these and be able to double back and revisit these places for more treasure and therefore more money for upgrades. Some areas also have added bits of lore that you can read through, which gives greater context to the game's story. I think that the presentation of optional exploration is far better here, and I felt more rewarded for going off the beaten path, which is a treat to do because RE4 is a visual buffet. Once again, the RE engine is proving itself to be one of the best going right now. Capcom has managed to cram so much extra detail into these environments, and this is astonishing considering how good the original game's environments still look to this day. RE4 Remake also tries to bring a bit more spookiness to the game, and I think we can all agree that the original RE4 was never that scary. And it's not like any moments here made me terrified either, but the changes in the atmosphere were really refreshing, and I think it helps the remake feel a little less stale over a longer playthrough. But beyond the gameplay, visuals, and all of that stuff, it's the story and its tone that's seen the biggest change. RE4 had a very whimsical sort of tone for a lot of its runtime. There were still moments where darker stuff took center stage, but for every one of those moments there was another where Leon would fill that space with an amazing quip of some kind. The remake approaches the story with a less quirky tone, which may or may not be an improvement depending on your tastes. Leon still cracks a joke every now and then though, and he even comments on things that happen as you fight enemies in combat, but his characterization is a little more consistent with where we saw him in RE2. RE4 is set 6 years after the events of Raccoon City, and some other missions since that time have clearly affected Leon. Just by looking at him, you can see he's grown a lot and is able to deal with greater threats with ease. But even if the game paints his character with a serious brush, he can still perform a mean suplex. Ashley has also received a major improvement in writing quality this time around. Her characterization before just wasn't good, and it contributed to a lot of people hating everything about her for years. The remake gives Ashley more time to shine, and the dialogue she has with Leon feels so much better. Before, it felt like Ashley was written entirely to be annoying. Now she actually feels like a deeper character with genuine reactions to the things happening around her. Leon and Ashley's friendship actually slowly builds throughout the game, and it's nice to see the two build some kind of camaraderie. Ashley even builds up some confidence towards the end of the game. That feels really satisfying to see. She gets given an actual arc here, and when put alongside the brilliant stuff the game already does with Leon, it's a joy to see. I'm not going to touch on the story too much more here for those that are wanting to avoid spoilers for now, but I'll just say that it mostly remains unchanged from the original version. Some events have been moved around here and there, but it largely plays out the same. The biggest omission is the Separate Ways campaign with Ada. That's not present at all in the remake as of now, but it'll most likely get added as DLC soon. Honestly, if it's half as good as the base game, I am more than happy waiting. My biggest problem with the original Resident Evil 4 was that it just felt a little too long. I feel like if a couple of hours were trimmed off the game, it would feel better paced overall. And the remake is still a very long game by RE standards. My first playthrough took me over 12 hours, and I definitely skipped a few things, so it easily could have been longer, but the playtime here feels justified. The remake does a better job of balancing the combat sections, exploration, story, and changes of scenery, and it all comes together to form an experience that's way more engaging to me. The biggest question now is whether the RE4 remake essentially writes off the original game, and I can say that that is not the case at all. Just like Resident Evil 2 and 3, the original experiences are still very much worth playing through. RE4 and its remake are both worth experiencing just as much as the other. I still intend to replay the original game a few more times, just like the remake. The real problem is that you don't get a choice to experience the original games with Resident Evil 2 and 3. Those classic versions are locked to either the hardware they came out on, digital versions on the PS3, or dodgy PC ports. And it's a shame that Capcom hasn't tried to re-release these games on modern hardware with proper support. Right now, you've got the choice to get RE4 on whichever platform you choose. So Capcom, if we could get some kind of modern port for RE1, 2, and 3, that would be great. But anyway, Resident Evil 4 Remake is genuinely incredible and managed to convert me to being a full-time RE4 believer. I'm also really excited to see what Capcom does next, and if RE5 is next in line to being remade, I think we all have notes on what needs improving that we can send Capcom's way. As long as Wesker is dressed head to toe in black leather again, I'll be happy. I'm giving the Resident Evil 4 Remake a 10 out of 10.